I just finished presenting a session with Janet Gallant from NBC where we looked at the word-of-mouth impact of Olympic advertisers. What we wanted to try to do was to understand, working with NBC, how much word-of-mouth lift Olympics advertisers got during the Winter Olympics versus word-of-mouth about those same advertisers in a period prior to the Olympics. And we also wanted to look and understand whether heavy Olympic viewers talked more about advertised brands than light viewers or non-viewers, and whether the audience who watched the Olympics on a multimedia way, people who watched on television, people who viewed the Olympics on the internet, what was their word of mouth about Olympic advertisers versus people who were not watching in that cross-media type of environment. And we found some extremely interesting results. We did find that there was a definite word-of-mouth lift for the Olympics advertisers across the entire spectrum of advertisers, as many as 3 million more conversations per week on average about those Olympic advertisers. We found that the Olympic viewers were very disproportionately word-of-mouth influencers, a group that we call conversation catalysts. So they were people who were predisposed to be talking more about products, services, and brands. And we've seen in our research, and it's confirmed here, that advertising does help to spark word-of-mouth conversation about brands. A few years ago, there was an assumption that perhaps word of mouth was the anti-advertising. People engaged in word of mouth because they were increasingly distrustful about advertising. What we've started to see recently is that, in fact, the two can work quite well together, and there's a ripple effect that can come from high-performing advertising that not only reaches its primary audience, but helps to spark and cue people to have conversations about advertised brands, and that's what we saw happening during the Winter Olympics. What we presented with NBC was the difference between the overall word-of-mouth levels for Olympic advertisers and then looking at those who were participating in watching the Olympics on a cross-platform basis. And there's no question that the cross-platform audience is a very engaged audience on just about every level that we measured. They're disproportionately word-of-mouth influencers compared to your average Olympic viewer. They're much more likely to be talking about the advertised brands, and I think this is due to a combination of factors. One is they are experiencing advertising in a variety of contexts, and so they have different ways they can relate to it. But maybe as importantly, the audience that's deciding, I want to consume the Olympics by watching on television, I want to be watching it on the internet, I want to be watching it on mobile. That portion of the audience is a very engaged and energetic audience, and as a result, they're engaging in everything. It's the sporting events, but it's also the ads, and it's the conversation about those advertised products. So we think as the world of cross-media continues to evolve and expand, there's a tremendous audience that are the people who right now are consuming cross-media that advertisers can benefit from greatly if they reach that audience not only on a primary basis, but through the social effect and the ripple effect of word of mouth. Beyond what we've seen for the Olympic advertisers as an aggregate, we were quite interested in seeing what's the size of the prize for advertisers who generated the highest volumes of word of mouth. And so we looked at the 10 highest performing advertisers from a word of mouth point of view, and what we saw there is an enormous increase in word of mouth that those top 10 word of mouth advertisers got during the Olympics. They were seeing close to 15 million more conversations every day during the Olympics about their brands than they were seeing in the period prior to the Olympics. So over the course of their 17 days during the Olympics, it was over 200 million more conversations. So for those advertisers who really nailed it in terms of sparking conversation and getting consumers engaged with what they were doing, such that they were not only paying attention, but talking about it with others, the upside potential is enormous. And we know these aren't just idle conversations where people just happen to be mentioning a brand. These are brands that are disproportionately getting positive word of mouth relative to what the rest of what we saw for those advertisers prior to the Olympics. And they're also much more likely to be having active advocacy, so active recommendations to buy or try the brand during those conversations. So a large volume as well as active advocacy, which is what any marketer is hoping for. So one of the questions that the marketing community is beginning to grapple with is the notion that the way to measure the effectiveness of advertising is no longer just around awareness or around intent to purchase or even actual purchase. It's increasingly around introducing the notion of advocacy. And I think smart marketers are beginning to realize in the era of social media and the word of mouth era in which we live, it's not just enough for a brand to be used. It's a brand that gets talked about that's going to be a brand that's a strong and growing brand. And we've seen clearly in our data, brands that have strong brand health are ones who get a talk share, a share of word of mouth that exceeds their market share. They get a talk share that exceeds their share of ad expenditures. And I do think that there's good evidence that healthy brands are getting not only people to pay attention to their marketing, to use their products, but to be talking about it with other people. And I think increasingly as we measure ad effectiveness, we have to be thinking not just about the people who are being reached on a primary basis, but also those who are being reached through the ripple effect. And in fact, there's some recent research that McKinsey's come out with that says that they call it consequential word of mouth that comes as a consequence of marketing activity. And they say that their research shows that in fact conversations that include references and are sparked by media and advertising are more powerful than those that just reach the primary audience. So we do have to think about the primary effects and then the social effects as well, and start to factor that into both media planning activities as well as advertising effectiveness. One of the interesting areas that people are beginning to work in around word of mouth now is to look at the relationship between the share of word of mouth that a brand gets versus the share of ad expenditures and how that all relates to market share, and also to look at the way that we're buying media. And we do see opportunities for smart marketers to begin thinking about what their share of voice is in terms of word of mouth and their ad expenditures, and to begin to use those as a way to help figure out, relative to the competition, how to set ad budgets, as well as an interim measure of ad effectiveness in the lag time between when ads run to when sales data comes in. If we can model and look at what the word of mouth impact has been as a result of our media expenditures, we can begin to know, are we achieving the effectiveness that we're looking for? Do we need to make some mid-course corrections? So I do think that there's a tremendous opportunity to begin using word of mouth data as metrics for performance and as metrics for planning. We've also done some very interesting work with some media agencies around media planning for word of mouth, and to begin to look at those media outlets where the audience is already talking about the advertised brand, and to begin to give that audience new things to talk about through advertising, and to begin to select media based upon their propensity to be talking about the brands that are advertising, kind of a fish where the fish are swimming approach to media planning. And this is something that I think we're also going to start to see more of, with word of mouth conversation about brands becoming a qualitative metric in media planning. We're beginning to see people use word of mouth research as a way to think about media planning and audience targeting. If I'm a marketer and I'm interested in reaching people who are already talking about my brand, so that I'm going to give them something new to be talking about with my advertising, and I can see that there's a media outlet over here where there's a high concentration of people talking about my brand relative to some others which might have comparable demographics but where people are not already talking about my brand, it starts to make sense that I'm going to advertise in the place where there's already a conversation going on, and I'm going to help join that conversation by giving increased content in the form of advertising. And so we can see already that media owners are beginning to look and use word of mouth research as an additional and innovative way to help brands understand what's the value that they can bring to the party. And we see it on the part of media agencies to begin thinking about media planning from the point of view of those media channels where there's already conversations taking place about the brand that they're representing, and use that as a way to help sort out how to plan media. So the research that we were reporting here was around the word of mouth lift associated with Olympics advertisers, and certainly the Olympics are a big and massive television audience. You get a similar type of audience around the World Cup. You get it for the Super Bowl. Maybe you get it for the Oscars. But we can and have demonstrated the word of mouth lift for Super Bowl advertisers. We've now seen it for the Olympics, and we've seen it for other big television events. But this is an opportunity to evaluate advertising and marketing and effectiveness that isn't just reliant on having an enormous audience size. We've seen the same phenomenon at work for people who have taken over the homepage for one day on a particular website, or we've seen it when advertising starts running in a particular television program or in a particular newspaper, where you can see the same types of word of mouth lift for that advertised brand and use that as a form of ad effectiveness feedback for the marketer. So it works well and has proven itself for the big media audience. It works equally well when the audience is of a more modest size, provided that the media weight for that audience is significant enough that somebody has a good chance of having seen that advertisement in that media vehicle.